So tell us a little bit about yourself, Captain Richardson.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I never really had a conscious, understood what my father actually did until I guess it was about when I was 18 or 19 years old. And but I had always been interested in aviation because we did a lot of things together. We built model airplanes. We would go over to Willow Grove and McGuire way back in the 60s and
Yeah,
sit at the fence and watch the jets take off. And so I kind of knew that was what I wanted to do. And so after high school, joined the Marines to fly. And
sounds like a pretty familiar story.
and graduated from college and went to Penn State University, graduated from Penn State, and
Okay,
then after that, joined the Marines and ended up down in Pensacola.
fantastic.
Did 10 years on active duty, and then got hired by American Airlines and retired from American Airlines after 35 years back on April 17th. I was also in the Marine Reserve for 5 years at Naval Air Station Willow Grove, flying A4s out of VMA 131.
Excellent, excellent. So let's flash forward to today. We have a number of events going on. First of all, is everybody in the family is doing well? I trust.
Oh yeah, they're all still asleep actually.
Yeah, only us well, us crazy people are up at we got 30.
Yep,
Once it's in the blood, it's hard to get it out.
it is.
Um, so we covered your father's history in his interview,
Mhm.
but I want to understand um, your personal connection to him. You talked about going and visiting the various airports and seeing
Mhm.
some of the flying events. What was that? Was there a seminal moment? Was there that spark that made you say, "Yeah, that's definitely what I'm going to be doing"?
Well, I'm going to say actually no, and if you
Oh,
would,
really?
I'd like to take you back a little bit. Um,
Okay.
you know, my dad um, is a lot of things to a lot of people. And I mean, he's a brother, a husband, obviously a father, a stepfather, and to many, he is a Tuskegee Airman. He's a living piece of history. But for most of my life growing up, the majority of it, he's just been dad.
Yeah.
And as I said, it wasn't until I was 18 or 19 that I realized that there was something special about him.
Yeah.
But up until that point, I mean, I think that I can remember back to being 3. And we lived in a second floor walk up in West Philadelphia off of 56 and Market.
Okay.
And that's not even there anymore. The house isn't even there anymore. But I remember having a dump truck and a train under my bed. And I remember him helping me put that train together and running the train. And then I remember I wanted some sand for my dump truck. So we got on the L and went to a Philadelphia Transit Authority. That's how far back this is going.
Wow.
We're talking about 58, 59.
Oh, wow.
And he went and, we got sand for my dump truck. He used to drive a cab in the evenings because, after World War II, African Americans still weren't allowed to fly commercially with the airlines. So it wasn't until 1963 Dave Harris got hired by American that we had an African American airline pilot.
Yeah.
But so my dad ended up being a school teacher. So in the evenings, he would drive a cab. And I remember Dad teaching me how to count with those old change makers with the quarters, nickels, and
I remember
dimes
that these
and
little
pennies.
silver things with
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. And
yeah,
he
yeah,
taught me how to count.
yeah.
And then I remember when we moved, or actually on the weekends, we would ride the L in the subway just for fun because I was
Yeah.
fascinated by that. And so he would do that with me. So, and I can go on and on and on and on and on up until even yesterday. My dad, DAD, because that's what I've always called him, and I still do today. My dad has always been there with me and for me.
Yeah.
And I'm 65, and so my entire life I know nothing but, I mean, you know, I had mom too. I don't want to make it seem
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
mom wasn't
I
there,
get it. Yeah.
but I'm blessed to be able to, even at this age, when I turned 65, the first phone call I got, Dad. When I graduated from high school, there was Dad. When I learned how to drive, there was Dad. When I got my commission, he pinned on my bars, Dad. When I got my wings, Dad. When I got hired by American, Dad. And then I had, you know, I was able to turn that around as I progressed through the airline and expose him to some things that I was doing. So for the 65 years of my existence, I've been blessed, and it is a blessing in today's world, that I can still pick up the phone and talk to Dad. But it wasn't until, I remember one day, I guess it was about 1962 or 63, maybe 64, somewhere in there.
Okay.
We were down in the basement of the house, and we were putting together a model airplane.
Yeah.
And the model airplane happened to be of a P-40. And we had gotten, you know, all the stringers on the dope, and I was painting it with the dope, and I was painting it, and they said, well,
Wow. You were a
let's,
pretty serious modeler, huh?
oh yeah, absolutely. Long
Also,
story.
yeah.
And so we're painting it with, he said, well, let's paint it olive drab, and then we're going to paint the tail red. And I looked at him and I said, why would we paint the tail red if the rest of it is olive drab? It doesn't look like that on the box. And he said to me, because when I flew those planes, that was the squadron insignia. We had red tails. I said, you flew those? And he goes, yeah, I did. And so that kind of put a thought, you know, but again, I'm 7 or 8 years old, so it's not
Yeah.
really connecting. And then over the years, it kind of, you know, it started something. And our next door neighbor behind the alley, his name, they called him Chubby Richardson, but it's no relation, just the same last name. He had
Yeah.
been a B-25 navigator. And a lot of
Oh, wow.
people don't know that the Tuskegee, the 301st,
24.
also had a bomber
Yeah.
squadron
Yeah.
that never deployed. And he was in that squadron. And then there was another friend of his that taught school named Nate King, and Nate King was a P-39 pilot. And so they all kind of always talked, and, you know, of course I was always tagging along with Dad, and I got to start to hear some of this and create a very small, you know, corn kernel of a consciousness of this. I guess it really hit home when, after I gotten commissioned, I was based at El Toro. And in 1977, the Tuskegee Airmen had their convention in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So I went down there with a friend of mine that was a black Cobra pilot. And it was then that I began to understand the magnitude of what he did, because Chappie James was there, Benjamin O. Davis was there, and I met a lot of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Not to interrupt you, Captain Richardson,
Mhm.
but I believe I may have passed through there at that same event, because that was a I remember that event,
Wow.
being in being in the LA area and
Mhm.
having that occur, and just having all those people together at that, in that one, it's like the stars aligned, you know,
Yeah,
just by
yeah.
chance happened to be there.
That's
So
where I first met Colonel McGee, way back, you know, in the mid '70s.
yeah.
And then,
Um,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I believe I was like, yeah, because I was like 6 or 7 years old.
Oh wow.
Uh, and my father had said, "You've got to come see this."
Okay.
But anyway, continue. Please tell
Yeah.
the rest of your story.
So I guess the real story, you know, and of course, as an adult, I was able to go to events with my father, both when I was in the Marines and as an airline pilot, and we were both on stage together.
Mm.
And, you know, of course, when it doesn't matter who you are when you're on stage with the Tuskegee Airmen. There's no light shining on you, and I'm
Yeah.
glad. I'm glad of that, because I'm a humble person and I don't like the light shining on me. However, I will say this, that having grown up and had that consciousness, even though it didn't develop until, I was maybe 20, and really get that gravity after that convention. I think what it taught me was that for all the sacrifices that his generation made, and that group of men, the Tuskegee Airmen specifically, and what they had to fight through domestically for literally to have the privilege to go into combat and die. I mean,
Yeah.
it's insane to think that wait a minute, I have to fight and convince people that I can go die for my country. And then what they had to go through when they came back after the war. And it still persisted even into the early 60s. And then those were the woke 30-somethings that went through the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And so to honor them, I didn't, beat any drum. It's just, to me, it makes sense to honor them. I need to walk through the same door and take advantage of the sacrifices that they made. It would be extremely disrespectful not to, particularly having a father that was a Tuskegee Airman and participated in that. So for me, I don't remember ever wanting to do or be anything else but a pilot, but a fighter pilot. And so if you'd asked me, well, what did you want to be when I grow up? It wasn't a fireman. It wasn't a policeman. It wasn't a businessman. It wasn't anything. I said, I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And of course, along the way, a lot of people said, oh, you're never going to do that. You're never going to do this. But I said, okay. And just kept moving.
Well, I remember first meeting Pete Peterson. I mean, big, strapping. I mean, the sun went away when the guy walked in the room.
I've got a
and
story about it.
he made such an impact. At 7 years old, my story was not quite the same. I'm the first, actually, my generation of cousins was really the first generation to get involved in aviation.
Okay.
I had a cousin who flew for the Honduran Air Force. Was shot down between the border of El Salvador and Honduras during one of the wars over a soccer game. And then my other cousin, who's a year ahead of me, we both went to the same high school. He ended up going to West Point and ended up becoming a helicopter pilot in the Army. Became an instructor out of Fort Rucker, and then spent some time down in Central America doing some flying down there. So we were the first generation to really get involved. At 7 years old, I had a captain come back, said, hey, would you like to come to the cockpit? Because back then they could do that.
Right.
And he put his kit bag on his seat, propped me up in that seat, and I looked out the window, looked at the gauges, and said, this is what I want to do.
There you go.
I wanted to be an astronaut, actually, initially. And so the whole reason behind going into the Corps was that desire to go into the Corps was like, you got to be a great pilot, right? You've got to be a tough individual, got to be technically savvy. And it seemed like that was the best option. So, and you didn't have to be on a ship at that point for 6 months at a time. So, but bringing that forward to today, we have a lot of social unrest. We have some medical issues that are going on, the pandemic, COVID-19. How do you think that experience with your father prepared you to deal with the events of today?
Well, I don't know if you want to open up that box, but
we're going to open it.
I see it's already, that lid is wide open. I really, my whole frame of reference for life is couched in the sacrifices, because there's, you got to remember, there's another generation after me and then after you.
Yeah.
And And so my whole frame of reference in life is based on the sacrifices of the greatest generation. My father tells me stories. My dad was born in 1925, but he had older brothers and sisters. One of my aunts, who's 97, is still alive and cognitive, and she's a lot of fun to be around. And she's 2 years older than my father.
Yeah.
There was 13 of them that grew up in Camden, New Jersey. And there's only 3 left now. But I remember I talked to my grandmother, my grandfather all the time. My grandfather was born in 1897, and he lived to 95. My grandmother lived to 93, I think. But I know I'm long-winded here, but
No, you're not long-winded at all. Take your time, please. This is a worthy story.
their sacrifices physically and mentally, and remember the era that they lived in.
Yeah.
They went through the Great Depression. My dad told me stories about my grandmother putting cardboard in his shoes, that he had a paper route and made 10 cents a week, and my grandfather demanded that he give 5 cents of that back to the family.
Yeah.
You know, they went through real discrimination, real
Yeah.
segregation, lynchings. You can't imagine. And then to have that generation get through that, and especially, and all 3 of my my dad, there's 3 boys in the family. He's the only one left, but they all served in the U.S. Army. I had an uncle that drove a deuce and a half in the Red Ball Express, and
Triple nickel.
and I had another uncle that was an aircraft mechanic and worked on B-29s. And so these men have a history of service. I never heard them complain a day in their life about anything. They just worked, and everything that they worked through, and still were very successful despite just blatant discrimination, racism. It wasn't soft. There was nothing soft about it. It was hardcore, in your face. We will string you up from a tree type of racism. And they still succeeded. And I think that's why I chose the Marines, because I wanted to see if I could stand the toughest experience. At least I thought it would be the toughest. And so in today's world, and the other thing that my father and his brother showed me was that the most important thing is your own personal accountability. You be
Absolutely.
excellent. You be excellent. Don't worry about what's going on. You just focus on your excellence and where you're going and what you're doing. And it'll work out. And it did. As far as the pandemic is concerned, I'm obviously not a medical person, but my opinion is that the nation overreacted. Again, I'm not a medical person. I'm just, I can only anecdotally about what's happened to me. I retired from American Airlines with 1,000 hours of sick time. Maybe that was dumb, but I don't get sick. I don't know why I don't get sick.
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't catch colds. I don't get anything. And I've always thought that, if humans are always going to have viruses and stuff's always going to happen. And as in every virus and every disease, the people with pre-existing conditions and not in so good health are always the ones that are have a higher risk in those things. And that's with everything.
Yeah.
So the notion that we shut everything down, even for the healthy people, I just think that's an overreaction. And so here we are,
And so just so for those folks who are just joining us, my name is Victor Castro. This is Mainline Weekend. We have Captain Eugene Richardson, who is a retired Marine, and a former chief, actually fleet manager for American Airlines. And we're discussing the impact of his father, uh, Dr. Eugene Richardson, former Tuskegee Airman. So for those of you just joining us, welcome to Mainline Weekend. So yeah, I've looked at the data on all the
Mm-hmm.
on all the things related to COVID-19. One of the things that struck me was uh, how it affected our what I consider to be our national treasures, which are
Yes.
our 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 greatest generation.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and it's affected different places differently. So
Mm-hmm.
in New York, for example, that was kind of the hotbed,
Mm-hmm.
ground zero, so to speak. And I saw the impact that it had. And so that was one of the things that was concerning to me, that I have this generation, just like you were just describing a little bit ago. I call them my flying dads. I have a very strong relationship with both my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very blessed to have them both alive. But I have this group of men and some women, some of them are 99s, that I call my flying dads and flying moms. And they kind of guided me through my aviation career, because there were some challenges there at various points, and they just said, "Hey, stay the course."
Yep.
And that history of knowing that they couldn't wear a certain uniform, or complete their trajectory
Mm-hmm.
downrange, so they could fully actualize what they were. But they are doing that. They're doing that through this thing called the next generation and the following
Yep.
generation. So um, as far as you're concerned, with regards to your family, what do you see for the next generation coming up?
I I have kind of a unique situation. I had kids late in life,
Yeah.
and I had two daughters. One just graduated. Um, she'll be going to the University of New Orleans on a full ride basketball scholarship.
Wow.
The other daughter is just, and I'm not, I know she's my daughter, and you want to brag about your kids, but this girl is just crazy smart. She's 15. She's a high school. She'll be a senior in the fall. She's enrolled in Baylor, taking a biology course and an English course this summer. And all she wants to do is be a surgeon. And so the way that my wife and we've raised our kids old school. My wife ran in the '84 Olympics, and so her discipline and athleticism, and me being in the Marines, and again, my father's instilled discipline of, staying the course and doing what you want to do. We've transferred that to our kids, and those are the two kids that we could affect directly. But I think that, and I've said this in talks and lectures before, because of social media and peer pressure, I think that a lot of young people are too distracted and care too much about what other people think about them. I know social bullying or social media bullying is real, but when I grew up, bullying was getting punched in the face in the schoolyard and having your lunch taken. The concept that somebody could bully me on social media is just foreign to me. You
Yeah.
just go click and turn it off. But this generation is so connected to that mentally that they can be manipulated by it. So what I would say is you have to tune out the noise and stay focused on what you're doing. Stay focused on what your goals are. If you There's a lot of noise, and some noise is significant and relevant, and some of it's not. Some of it's contrived.
Yeah.
And you have to learn to analyze the facts, not just look at something that you saw on the internet. You have to analyze the facts and make decisions for yourself. You have to be engaged in critical thinking, not mob not mob movement because they said it on social media. You have to break the facts down for yourself and analyze those facts, but keep moving forward towards your goals and the things that you want to do. And you have to stay disciplined. One of the things that I tell my kids, and I've told them that, and they've embodied it, is, the civil rights movement was about equal opportunity. And all of the struggles from our ancestors in the past was all about creating equal opportunity. Equal opportunity does not guarantee equal outcomes. Your effort determines the outcome.
Absolutely.
And
yeah, focused application of effort.
yep, exactly. That's what determines the outcome. But you have this growing group that thinks that the outcome should be equal. And that's just not the case. And if you're not willing to hold yourself accountable and put the focus and the effort into what you're doing, I don't care what opportunities are there, you're not going to be successful. Just because people came before you and took down gender barriers, racial barriers, blew up ceilings and all that, you're not going to rise through that or walk through that door unless you actually have the determination, drive, and focus to do it.
Absolutely. And then the other consideration is that when you go through that effort, in some ways, we're individuals, but we also have to operate as we have to depend on other people.
A team.
So
you need mentors.
I try to hold people to this, people that are close to my circle, hold them to that similar standard, because as I say, all boats will rise in the tide if we hold each other close, tightly, and try to achieve the best that we can, and expect that from other folks around us.
I can think of, well, the two institutions that I've been associated with, the Marine Corps and American Airlines. And in both of those institutions, I had a mentor. And it wasn't necessarily, a hand-holding close mentorship, but it was someone that would, from time to time, advise me on how to navigate certain situations.
Yeah.
Or a few words of advice that if, again, free will, you don't have to take them to heart, but if you took, and I did take them to heart, because I've always figured, hey, you've been there, I'm going to listen. And and I did, and it was beneficial. So I guess what that speaks to is that, even though we may have the drive and determination and we've walked through the door, you still have to have some sort of mentor, someone that's kind of looking out for your best interest in this big organization.
Yeah.
And that can help you navigate the intricacies, the details in that particular organization.
Yeah, there's so once again, for those of you joining us, my name is Victor Castro. This is Mainline Weekend. We have Captain Gene Richardson, retired American Airlines, and also former Marine Air Force A4 pilot. Yeah, so the thing I try to leave to students that I work with, I have a program that I do with some high school age kids. I bid my schedule around Wednesdays having off in the afternoons. So I'm the guy with reserve to try to avail myself of some flexibility in the schedule.
Sure.
But from 1:30 to 4:30, we would go into the high schools, and it started off as a math, science, applied math, science, and aviation program, because it seemed like a great metaphor for getting kids involved, pushing them beyond where they are. And the thing I noticed was by doing that process, as you said before, being accountable, focused effort towards a goal, across the board. The worst offender was a kid who had 80 days of missed classes.
Wow.
Within a year. The second when the year rolled around, 2 missed days, and his grades went from C's and D's to A's and B's. In the second year of the program, he missed 1 day where he was legitimately ill,
Hmm.
and all his grades were nothing worse than a B plus.
Wow.
So, and he just graduated, so it was kind of a, you know, proud adopted
Absolutely.
papa moment,
Yeah.
right? And he's going to pursue a career in aviation as a result of that. And I'm not saying that you have to do that, but it's part of that.
Sure.
That's part of the legacy that we're
Hmm.
talking about, is that the efforts that were made earlier can now be brought forward
Exactly.
for the next generation. Um,
And that brings up
what?
I'm sorry, just it kind
Go,
of
go ahead.
just tag off of that and segue off of that is, um, I know that you're saying I'm retired. Well, I'm only temporarily retired. Um,
Okay.
I'm not stopping. Um,
All right.
and so I've accepted a job offer with the FAA as an aviation safety inspector
Wow.
and in the DFW certificate management office. And as soon as they can figure out how to onboard me through COVID, I'll be starting there and
Fantastic.
continuing
Fantastic. So
the
you can
career in
continue to
aviation.
contribute. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great avenue. So that's one of those things, that there's an evergreen quality to an aviation career.
Yep.
Um, it's a true apprenticeship. One of the things that attracted me to aviation, as I said before, I had my flying dads, but it was
Hmm.
definitely a feeling of an apprenticeship. And and now that I have my journeyman's license, so to speak,
Hmm.
I hold that very near and dear. So we do ground school courses, and I found that that's part of the allure of this business, is that once it gets in your blood, there is that brotherhood, sisterhood,
Yeah.
camaraderie, and it crosses all. I mean, there's no, the airplane doesn't know that who's flying it. It just knows when it's not done properly.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
know,
It's an equalizer.
it is an equalizer. It is an equalizer, and that's one of the
Yeah.
great things about this industry. Given that the presence of women
Hmm.
pilots and people from various groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, it really has become kind of an equalizer and has
It
joined the
has.
world together. I mean, the world, we've brought the world together
And,
as a
and
result of work.
there's so many facets in aviation where you can, you're going to have contact with the same people. And then when you look at the minority community, we're still underrepresented,
Yeah,
extremely underrepresented. And it's not due to barriers, it's due to access. It has, it goes back into the schools with, minorities and STEM programs and getting a STEM education so that they can even look to something like aviation as a career path. But there's so many different levels that we can participate in aviation. It doesn't have to be in the cockpit. A couple of guys that I used to be close with through our daughters playing basketball. One's a dispatcher at Southwest, and the other one is a very senior mechanic at Southwest Airlines here in Dallas. And so they're in aviation,
yeah.
just in different
As
parts of it.
as I said to some of the students, I said, "All right, so you love working on cars, you
Yeah.
love working on things mechanical.
Yeah,
Go work on the jet engine. It's you know,
that's right.
it's and it comes with travel benefits.
Yeah.
I don't know if the car dealership gives you too many
Yeah.
travel benefits that'll take you far and wide
Yeah.
around the world.
And the there's always a tug of war between labor and management as far as compensation is concerned. But if you look at the overall compensation for the mechanic or the dispatcher, it's pretty darn good compared to other occupations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so let's talk about one last story about Dad.
Okay.
What story could you tell him that's going to make him laugh?
Okay. There's actually two,
All
but
right.
I'm going to give you one and two,
Okay.
and they both have to do with me. Me,
Of course.
him and I together. But he still tells the story, so I know it's near and dear to his heart.
Okay.
So I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but anyway, I will. So one day, I guess I was about 8 or 9 or 10,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. I'm riding my bike, and where we lived in Mount Airy, there was a back out. We lived on a street called Marion Lane. It was a horseshoe, but in the back there was driveways, and the driveways used to go past other people's garages. And so I'm riding my bike, and it was early Saturday morning, and for some reason I looked at everybody had locks on their garage door,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of those locks said Yale on them. And so I get back home after my bike ride and playing, and I said, Dad, and then at some place I had heard Yale University,
Yeah.
someplace, I don't know, on television or something. So one day I just blurted out, Dad, guess where I'm going to college? He said, where? He said, I'm going to Yale. And so my dad gets all puffed up. He's go, my son wants to go to an Ivy League college. And he's just all happy. And then he goes, why do you want to go to Yale? And I said, because that's the name on all the locks. And he still tells that story today.
That's a great story.
Like Art Linkletter used to say, out of the mouths of babes, you never know what's going to come.
There you go. There you go.
Nobody on this call knows who Art Linkletter is except you and me. The other one was, and he'll remember this because it was painful. We used to go fishing a lot, and so I would say, I'd see my dad cast the line way out, and we used to fish under the Strawberry Mansion Bridge and in the Scoop Hill.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is. Yeah.
When you could actually, the water was extremely clean and the fish tasted good, because we used to go fishing there and take the fish home and cook them and eat them. But anyway, so he would cast out, and I said, I'm going to cast out like my dad did. And here's this little kid with this big pole. And so he had gone behind me, and he was getting something out of the tackle box. And I reeled this thing back, and I was going to whip it, and then it stopped. And I heard my dad yell. Well, guess what?
You hooked him.
The hook impaled him in the chest, and I was trying to pull him. I was trying to cast him out. And so he still remembers that too, getting impaled by the fish hook when this little kid was trying to cast the line out.
Those are fantastic stories. I'm pretty sure that's going to bring a smile to his face.
Oh, yeah.
Recounting those stories. Thank you for sharing those stories with us. Thank you for being here on Mainline Weekend, which is part of the Mainline Tonight program. We'll be back on Monday with additional programming. Okay. So, Captain Gene Richardson, I know we went back and forth on this, and you said, well, I'm not that formal. So, but I still, like I said in our phone conversation, you earned this. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for all that your father did to get you to this point. And I'm going to tell you this before we go. Okay. I had the privilege of meeting Span Watson before he passed, and his son he was an 06 in the Navy. Right. And I remember seeing it, like, here we are at this event. This was when Lee Archer passed away at his funeral. And I remember looking at his son and going, wow, I mean, those are some big shoes to fill. Well, I think you've stepped into the shoes and filled them quite nicely. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Job well done. And continue to provide services to us over at the FAA.
Absolutely.
And when I do see you, I know that you will be here to help.
Absolutely.
And on that note,
Absolutely.
Captain Eugene Richardson, Victor Castro, this is Mainline Weekend.